Emerson Film Radio, a sonic homage to the visual medium. This week, our artist of choice is the Gorillaz. Excuse me. A band like no one has ever seen. Literally, the Gorillaz are a virtual techno rock band created by Damon Albarn, frontman of the British indie rock band Blur in 1998. Albarn worked with Tank Girl illustrator Jamie Hewlett to create the cartoon members of the Gorillaz, Murdoch, Tootie, Noodle, and Russell. Albarn and his cast of cartoon musicians have collaborated with such artists as Snoop Dogg, Bobby Womack, Bashy, MF Doom, Mos Def, Lou Reed, Danger Mouse, and Del the Funky Homo Sapien, just to name a small few. All three of their albums are available on iTunes, or you can purchase them on their website, www.gorillaz.com, spelled with a Z instead of an S. Today, I am joined by my co-host George Menard.
What's up?
And Grant Olans.
How's it going?
Guys, you were just listening to, first, Welcome to the World of the Plastic Beach by the Gorillaz and Rhinestone Eyes by the Gorillaz.
Yeah, we were.
Pretty exciting. So, our second episode ever.
In the history.
In the history of EFR. It's already on the wiki page. They've already written down second episode. Gorillaz was the featured band.
Check the date.
Check it. What films have you guys seen recently?
I'll start. I just saw Out of the Past last night with Robert Mitchum, and it's a really great film.
Yeah.
We can I guess we can talk about that a little later. But I saw that, and I also saw In Bruges, which you guys watched with me.
Mm-hmm. Saw that for the first time,
and
that was a very interesting film. A good film.
Saw The Player, which we'll talk more about.
Yeah.
Right. The Player's our main.
Yeah. We also had we also all watched Putney Swope by Robert Downey Sr. Probably his most famous movie, I think.
Yeah.
It's definitely well
very
known.
Little of I know the very little amount that I know of him. That's the one I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we all saw that one, so let's talk about that.
That film, very strange. It's a complete parody. It's a complete farce. It's a complete joke, making fun of the advertising industry. And what I think is really interesting about how advertising was done back then not advertising, how spoofing was done back then, parody was done back then, it was much more subtle.
Yeah.
It
was.
Dr. Strangelove. It's not like nowadays we have movies like Scary Movie and things like that, where just by their texture, they're parodies, they're jokes. You can just tell. Whereas those films, it seemed like a serious film in the beginning, but it's much more subtle. I mean, it's not subtle, but it's more subtle than it is today, I think.
I think it has a lot to do with, you were talking about Scary Movie, and that makes fun of a lot of other films where this makes fun of like a political idea or a social concept. So
yeah,
I think naturally maybe they're going to try and make it a little more subtle and present it in a more interesting way.
Sure.
Because they're going to take that a lot more seriously, you know?
Yeah, it's got a little bit more to say than just, aren't these horror films dumb? Mm-hmm. It's like actually...
Yeah, it has more of a point to it. There's definitely more of a message to Putney Swope than any of the Scary Movies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really enjoyed it. I had seen it before on YouTube, and this is my second time watching it. And I enjoyed it even more the second time.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's just...
Picked up on some more stuff.
Yeah.
A little layered.
Yeah, it's just great. I just really enjoyed that movie a lot.
I thought it was really interesting how Robert Downey Sr. voiced over Putney Swope. He was the voice of Putney Swope.
Yeah, that might have... If I knew that beforehand, it might have ruined it for me.
Did he...
Possibly.
Wait, that was his voice?
Yeah, that was...
Oh, I thought the thing was that the actor couldn't remember his lines, so they dubbed it over later. I thought that was Robert Downey Sr.'s voice.
No, it's literally Robert Downey Sr.'s voice. And if you listen carefully, you can kind of tell.
I didn't even notice
that. You can kind of tell it's Robert Downey Sr. just doing this.
Right.
Or whatever.
He still had the New York accent a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Got
the accent,
but
I don't know what even that actor sounds like, because I don't because I've never heard his voice.
We should probably give a little bit of insight into what Putney Swope is for
I think
people that don't know.
Would you say Grant's probably the biggest expert on this film?
I mean,
if not the biggest supporter of it.
I guess, I don't know. But yeah, just to give like a brief synopsis, we start out at a New York City advertising agency, and the head of this agency dies in the beginning of the film. It's not a spoiler. Trust me, it happens
it's
in the
like
very
on the
beginning.
tagline, practically.
And so this someone new has to take over, and so the people in the company vote on this guy named Putney Swope, who's black, and that has a lot to do with it because it has a lot of
racial
undertones, especially at this time. It was made in
69, I think,
or 68, something like that. And so it makes fun of that. He's kind of he's very stubborn with his ideas. He gets a huge group of other black workers to give him ideas, but he shuts down all their ideas, and he just kind of goes with whatever he thinks of. He has a name for the new company. What's
Truth and Soul.
Truth and Soul.
Yeah.
He changes the name of the company to Truth and Soul.
And it's like all the people he hires are like militant, like radical, like Black Liberation Army members, practically.
Yeah.
Right.
They're all very like leftist, and they're all have like all radical viewpoints and stuff. Yeah, it's just
radical movie.
And I don't know a lot about blaxploitation films, but that's probably I would imagine sort of one of the first, kind of an inspiration for later films like that Tyler Perry would make, or even like the Wayans,
Superfly,
like the Wayans brothers, or exactly.
That movie had to have paved the way for, I'm sure, many films.
He Robert Downey Sr. talks. He gives talks and interviews to a lot of groups like that, like BET would interview him for Putney Swope. So
really?
He definitely has an influence on black culture with that film, which is funny because he's like
white.
The whitest guy you can ever imagine.
He's like Irish Catholic, I think, too. Yeah, interesting.
This is Robert Downey Jr.'s dad we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Who looks and kind of sounds like him, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Looks more than he sounds, I'd say.
You can tell it's his dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other movie we watched was In Bruges.
Right.
Which was it's an awesome movie. It's made by the same guy who wrote
and directed Seven
Psychopaths, which I had seen.
I haven't.
Oh, it's so fantastic. But we're not. We were just discussing.
We're not going to go into that.
We were actually just discussing how some film podcasts and things like that, if they're not careful, will just be like, "Oh, I've not seen that movie. Have you seen this?" And the other guy will be like, "No, I haven't seen that. Have you seen this? No, I haven't seen that. Have you seen that?"
It's like, "Oh, I got to check it out. Let me add it to my queue."
Yeah. But anyways.
Yeah.
It's a film that takes very serious things like murder, child murder, suicide, the mob, organized crime, and puts it in a very light position. It's very lighthearted.
Yeah.
But it's not for parody. It's for storytelling purposes, honestly, and and for humor, but not in like a shock value, black, like dark humor type way.
And the whole film's about Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson play two hitmen, and they're on the run, and they hide out in the small town of Bruges, which is in Belgium.
Yeah.
And Colin Farrell absolutely despises being in Bruges. He can't stand it. It's just like kind of it's like one of those small like European towns that a lot of like tourists go to see all the sights and all the medieval architecture and things like that.
Yeah.
So he can't stand it. Brendan Gleeson loves being there, and it's just kind of like their time spent. Great how it opens up, which opens up with them in Bruges. You don't see the heist that went wrong, or the hit that went wrong until later in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's just a good
way of doing things.
Really strong dialogue, really good character development, and
it's like everything. What's nice about that film is that it just puts you in a world where everything's already in motion.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like you're starting the narrative way further along than all these characters' lives. and it seems fast paced sort of because of that, but it's really not. It takes its time.
Yeah,
not like in a bad way, but it gives you some leeway. It's not just rapid pace through the story. There's a lot of downtime.
Yeah, it's definitely. I called it like somewhat the European Pulp Fiction.
Yeah,
like the British Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, that was your pitch when we started to watch that.
Yeah, that was my pitch. That was my hook.
Which is not an unfair comparison, I don't think.
Yeah, it's definitely. It has its own. It has its own tone too. It's very different from Pulp Fiction, but also very similar with just lots of different characters.
Yeah.
The different storylines intertwining. Mm-hmm. Quick, witty dialogue, clever dialogue.
So, right.
Yeah. I mean, I also saw. I never seen it. I saw Easy Rider for the first time the other night.
Right, which I missed.
Yeah.
Have you seen it, Grant?
I missed that too.
Yeah. So, George, you watched Easy Rider.
Yeah, I thought it was just great. Like, that's one of the films they talk about. They talk about Bonnie and Clyde, or even The Graduate. Talk about like that change in American movies, into the 70s, where the new Hollywood and all that stuff comes in. And it's just like it's not a lot of dialogue. It's not a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of just Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper just driving their motorcycles across the Midwest, and just beautiful scenery and just a great soundtrack.
Yeah,
and it's a lot about hippie culture, a lot about kind of. It's a great look into American culture at that time, and how things it was changing from that old traditional set of values that were in the 40s and 50s, and kind of moving into the 60s and 70s, and kind of this kind of new generation, and it's kind of looking at all that. There's also really a lot of experimental stuff in it, which I was surprised at. I thought it would be rather tame by today's standards, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff. There's a lot of the film's edited really interesting, where it'll go from one scene to another, but it will cut in between the last frame and the first frame of the new scene, repeatedly, back and forth really quickly, like a flashing effect almost.
That's interesting.
And it'll just be then it'll just go to the next scene, after 3 cuts back and forth. And then there's a really strange drug trip towards the end of the film in a graveyard, and it's just it's weird. It's something out of a European art house film. It's really out there, and I wasn't expecting that from Easy Rider. I loved it. I thought it was really great, and I can see why it has the influence that it has.
I always thought it was interesting how in that movie they're supposed to be hippies. Right?
Yeah,
they are
sort
hippies,
of
and they're riding motorcycles, which I always thought was interesting because I don't group motorcyclists and hippies nearly in the same category.
Right.
They don't even there's no Venn diagram for me of hippies and motorcyclists.
Right.
But apparently there is. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw the first 5 minutes of it, I think. And yeah, one of the first things I noticed was just no dialogue.
Yeah.
I love movies like that. Either whether they start out like that, or whether they're like that for a lot of the film. It's always interesting to see a movie without dialogue. It's very refreshing, and you can do some really interesting things with just images and music.
Yeah, it's just take advantage of the medium and just telling the story visually rather than having to explain what's happening and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about, actually, our top 5 favorite opening shots to films. Let me clarify that. I said movie shots in the beginning. George corrected me. Rightfully so. So we'll be right back after this song. Enjoy On Melancholy Hill by the Gorillaz.